Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is our good friend, Lisa Crayton. For more than 30 years, Lisa has been focused on writing, planting hope. Her extensive background includes corporate publications management, ghostwriting, TV and radio interviewing, publicity, and e-publishing. A freelance editor, she's edited magazines and books, and as an award-winning freelance writer, she's written articles, devotionals, Bible study guides, columns, and essays. The author of I Want to Teach My Teen About Money Management, Lisa has also served as a contributing author for several other nonfiction books. A gifted speaker with years of experience in church leadership roles, she teaches at writers' conferences and other events, including, of course, publishing and color events. Lisa earned her Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the National University and a BS dual degree cum laude in Public Relations and Journalism from Utica College. Lisa's writing path took a turn when she received an email in 2005 asking if she'd like to write a children's book. Today, she's the author of 14 of them, 13 written and published in the last 5 years. Her books encompass biographies, literary criticism, and youth guidance topics. She also is co-author of a 6-book series on economic topics for kids. Her latest book, Wangari Maathai, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, Get to Know the Woman Who Planted Trees to Bring Change, is from Capstone Press. It reminds children to plant trees, which Wangari believed are living symbols of peace and hope. Lisa's vision for writing children's books includes a similar goal, to inspire children to be living symbols of peace and hope. Broad themes in her books include loving our neighbors and the environment. So we're really pleased to have Lisa with us here today. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm excited to be with you. I just appreciate you and your work for writers and your love for readers and always trying to connect the two. So I'm thrilled to be here today.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And it's always a pleasure to do anything in collaboration with you. So this is another great opportunity for that. So we're in the middle of the coronavirus epidemic. Maybe you can just start by sharing some of your thoughts on that whole situation and dealing with it.
It's been a very interesting for me. I have been home for the past 2 weeks from work, from my 9 to 5, and just grateful to be able to be at rest and at peace at home. And my son is at home as well, and he has been doing a lot of the grocery shopping and stuff when we can, before everything became even more restrictive. But I think it's a very interesting time for us to be in. Obviously, it's a time that's caused a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, a lot of stress, a lot of sickness, and a lot of death. And then for most of us, we have nothing to relate this to. There's nothing we can connect it to that we've ever seen or heard or dealt with. And I think that's what makes it scary in a lot of respects. And for me, my first week, I was so in tune with the news and keeping abreast of everything. And I realized at the end of the week, I was telling my son something, giving another update number 1 million. And I could tell it kind of stressed him out. And it made me step back and say, wow, Lisa, you really need to, although I may want that information and I may, the way my brain processes and the way I pray, I may want it. Perhaps our children doesn't need it the same way. And we need to filter how we chat with our children. We need to filter what we say to them. We need to tell them the truth and let them be aware. But I think we don't want them to be overloaded. And I think that's across the board, even as adults. We don't want to be overloaded. We don't want to get so sensory overloaded that we can't find faith or peace or hope. We can't sleep at night. And so that's what I've been trying to really do this past week, is just getting my mind to a place and my spirit to a place where it's rested. This is a physical rest most of us have now been granted. So now we can take the opportunity to have more of a mindful rest and a peaceful rest. So that's how I've been dealing with it. I do know people, online friends, as well as people I've met in person who are sick, some who have tested positive, others are presumed positive. I know people whose family members have mild cases. And so I know of, others who know people who have died and can't hold funerals. So it's a very interesting time in history. And we just want to be able to move from here with a sense of hope and a sense of peace.
Yes. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Lisa. I couldn't agree more. Um, Maybe you could talk about, in your past,
Hmm.
different times when you've gone through challenges and God has really been there for you. What does that kind of experience look like for you?
Sure. I was going to, because I want to talk about reading in trying times from the perspective of helping our children with the reading material we give them. So I was thinking about myself as a child and things that I went through. And for me, from a young age, as you know, I was born with only 7 fingers, 2 on my left hand. And so from an early age, I was bullied as a child. From an early age, people rejected me because I was born different. I had a hard time making friends because of my difference. I had a hard time discerning who really were friends. People would act like they're friends and then they would turn on me. Um, and then I had another situation when I was about 12 years old or 11 years old when my parents were, we have a very interesting story. My parents were separated and divorced for years, and then they got remarried like 4 years after I graduated from college, and was remarried to my dad died. So when I was about 12, our family got evicted. We was living with my dad, and we eventually all the kids went to live with my mom. But so I had that trying time, and then food insecurity based on that. And throughout that time, I knew people who were Christians, friends, family members, etc. And then as I started getting older and going to church with some friends, God really started helping me to accept myself, to accept others. He gave me encouragement. He helped me know to appreciate other people, to not make quick judgments. We tend to judge books by their covers, including people, right? And so God just helped me with those. And he gave me this sense of peace and security in those moments. And I've had other things as an adult, some, even more critical, more serious. I've been thinking, Brian, in this COVID-19 situation, and people talking about they having faith and going into places knowing they're sick. When I was expecting, I had just found out that I was expecting, and I got sick for somebody who came from church who was really sick. And he said it was like a leader, and all his people came off the plane, and they came right to our church conference. And he was like, "Oh, by faith, I made it." And they sent me down to meet the car. And I didn't know, nobody knew he was sick. Today, no, even without COVID-19, no one would be able to fly looking like he did. So he came and he was sick and all of this. Within 2 or 3 days, I had really bad bronchial issues. And after maybe a week or two of not being able to stop coughing, similar to what people are going through now, I had to go into the hospital emergency and found out that I had pneumonia. Wow. And I was 2 months pregnant and had to be in the hospital for 5 days.
Wow.
3 months later, I got it again. And so when we're talking about social distancing and everything that's happening now, it really hits hard to me because I remember what I went through. And in that moment, we talk about how God helps us in trying times. God really ministered to me. He gave me peace. Thankfully, I had just found out that I was carrying my son, so I could tell everybody in the emergency room, hey, whatever you do, whatever medicines you give me, just, be cautious. And so, but God gave me a tremendous amount of peace. He gave me people to help encourage me. I had a lot of people praying for me. I had great medical staff. And that time was really one of the times I had never been that sick before. And God really helped me through it. And with, great medical care and great medicines, I was fine. So that was just one example of a big example as an adult of how I went through a tiring time.
Well, I can sure understand why, social distancing means more to you than would normally be the case.
It's really serious. People are not taking it serious enough. And I think had we known he was that sick, they probably wouldn't have sent me downstairs because, my bishop and my pastor were aware. But either way, he should have never taken that plane and that flight. And I can't even remember. I don't even know if he even went, how long he stayed at the conference, if he went to the emergency room. All of that is a blur. All I remember is getting sick after.
Wow. Well, since you've written so many children's books and, we've talked about the importance of, equipping children with concepts like empathy and love and, neighbor and these different concepts. So maybe could you talk a little bit about, how that's reflected in your children's books and how important that is to instill in children?
Yes. So my books are not Christian. They're not for the Christian market. They're for the general market. They're for the educational market. These are books that kids would get in school when they're doing reports, or they're interested in different topics, or they go to their local libraries, right? And so they span very different topics. Some of the ones that I recently did, like I keep thinking about this one that I did, is called Coping with the Aftermath of a Natural Disaster. And the interesting thing about this, when I was looking at it today, this is very similar to what we're happening now. It's not a natural disaster, but the things that are happening in the nation and worldwide are the same thing kids are dealing with when it comes to the situation with the pandemic. And I've written books about, I have a book on confronting racist behavior. I have a book on culture appropriation. And those books basically help kids to understand race relations, what's right, what's wrong, how to respect other people who are different, how to love people who are different. For example, again, because I was born different, I'm very sensitive to that. And so I'm able to understand that. Two of my books that recently came out also were, one was on the whole disability rights movement. And then this one is beating bullying against teens with disabilities. And in that book, again, it's talking about, generally it's for all kids, but it's to help them to understand bullying, what it is, why it's bad, how it affects children with disabilities or people with disabilities. And then how do we go from there in respecting people, understanding people, and treating people differently. I think it's really important right now that kids begin to understand what's happening in the world and how to be different. There is a right or wrong. There's some things, there's a definite right or wrong. For example, with the COVID-19, a lot of Chinese Americans are being treated and discriminated against because of things people have said about where this disease originated from. That is wrong. And kids should understand that that is wrong. Well, then what do we do right? If we're not training our children at home how to be empathetic, how to be nice, how not to bully, then those things are not, they're not going to go outside of our homes and do it. And my books, in some respects, all of them have some topic that will address some issue. For example, like I said, the disabilities. The ones that relate to biographies, on the other hand, it helps children to understand that they can dream. They can be anything they want to be. Because you know what, Brian, we're talking a lot about the present, and we're talking about this whole COVID-19 and what's going on, and kids' whole routines have been destroyed. But what's going to happen after this? While kids are home, they should still be thinking about what I want to be when I grow up. They should still be thinking that, oh, that's a cool career that I want to investigate. And so while kids are home, they could be reading those materials, because a lot of public libraries, for example, you can access those digitally, electronically. So those are topics that we want to still be talking with our kids about. We want to inspire their dreams. We want to inspire their hopes. We want to address their fears. I have a book that I had, one of my books talks about self-esteem and self-confidence, helping kids boost their self-esteem and self-confidence. These are topics that are not going to go away simply because we're dealing with a pandemic. And so my books and children's books in general can inform, they can inspire, they can educate, they can motivate, and they can challenge children. They can say, hey, this can be different. You can be different. What do you dream the world to be after this, in the future? There's still a future. We're not, hopefully, all going through this thinking this is the end of the world. So there has to be a future, and we have to continue to talk to children about good things and happy things while we, discuss the real serious issues of the day.
Well, it's really great to hear how many different books that you have that, can speak to the different areas that kids do need to hear about. Mm-hmm. I didn't even realize the breadth, of the different topics that you've written about, in that regard.
Yeah, it's I've been blessed to have these opportunities, and it was all, in the bio that you read today, I said my writing took a turn. I never wanted to write children's books. Actually, Brian, I never wanted to write books. I was ghostwriting books for other people, but I didn't want to write books. And God opened the door for me to do that. And then he opened me the door to write children's books. And I think as writers, sometimes we need to look at the way God is leading us as opposed to how we want to go. Because I would still be writing articles, I still be writing devotionals, which I'm doing still anyway, but I would have missed the opportunity to help children today like a book helped me. I'm a writer because when I was in 8th grade, I read a book about Joseph Pulitzer, and it was a biography similar to the ones I write with a timeline and information about his life and his career. And I got so inspired and I decided I'm going to be a writer,
That's
and
amazing.
Writer, yes.
That's really great.
And I'm leaning over here, Brian, which is bad for video, but I actually, some years ago, I went and actually bought a copy of the book that inspired me when I was in 8th grade.
How cool.
Isn't that cool? And I read it again, and of course I could not figure out why I was inspired. It didn't for me. Decades later, what it did as a child, and that's what we want all kids' books to meet kids where they are today, and then their future, we hope to inspire.
So kind of going through this, situation that we're in right now, has that inspired any new books or ideas for new books that you want to write next?
Yes and no. I have ideas on different books. One of the ones I've really, a book that's really been on my heart, Brian, is a book about food insecurity and how we help kids to understand that there's so many children who are hungry. For example, during this whole COVID-19, one of the initial issues and recurring issues that's going on was the issue of how do we get kids food who normally get their food in school.
Yes, yes.
This districts didn't want to close because they knew that they were the ones feeding children. I was one of those kids back then, so I totally get this. And so I really would like to write a book about food insecurity with the background of one individual who was very influential in that area, and just helping kids to understand, basically saying there's no shame in getting help. And that's a theme even for today. There's no shame in going to the doctor. I mean, of course, we know tests are, at the time of this, when we're talking, tests are not widely available, but there's no shame in looking for help. And so that's a book that I really want to write. I do want to write some picture books, but Brian, they are hard to write. I have more work in that area to do.
Well, each author's got their own, niche, their own segment.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't have to write everything for everyone.
Exactly.
So, you've done a good job at kind of I don't know what the right grade level is or whatever, but not the super young kids, but
right.
A little bit older kids. And, that's a wonderful ministry. So.
And that's how I look at it. Yes, most of my books are for the 6th graders up. My latest book's on Wangari. That book is for the 3rd to 5th graders. But everything else is for the younger kids. For the older children, which is funny because those are the ones that I pretty much enjoy when I was doing Sunday school ministry. That those were the ones that I enjoyed teaching, the high schoolers and particularly.
Well, good for you to have that much patience. That's not an age group that I would naturally affiliate with.
I love the teenagers. Bring me the teenagers. Give me your teenagers and young adults.
I always felt that if I was going to teach anything, it would only be college. That would be the only thing I think I would be able to do.
That is true. That's a good age group too.
So Lisa, you mentioned a little bit ago that, one of the books that you wrote was helping kids deal with natural disasters, and that's, pretty analogous to the situation that we're in right now. So is there a segment from that book that you could read to us?
Sure. I'm just going to read a little quote from here. I was looking at particularly the conclusion, and it says, when people cope well, they not only survive long term, but they thrive. They embrace the courage and strength to resume their lives. They get help when needed with mental or emotional distress. They team up to help others, and they use community or government resources to rebuild. As a result, people are emotionally and mentally ready to face the future, even if that means facing yet another natural disaster. And I thought that was just an important thing to share because obviously we don't ever want to see another COVID anything. No new year at it. COVID-19, let's shut it down, right? But there are other things that will come in their lives depending on where children live. Hurricanes, floods, when we had the wildfires in certain parts of the country. So children as well as adults, we need to thrive through this, and we need to come out of it stronger. One thing I shared in a quick video I did to Facebook earlier was that we want to be better and we want to be different coming out of this. But we want to be different, but we also want to be better. We all desiring to be better. We want something different, but wow, if this is over in several months and we are still the same people and we still go about life the same way, we may have missed a really important time to change for the better. And that's what we hope. I mean, children's books can have that impact to help children live better, do better, have a better future. And it's the same way, if we come out of this COVID-19 situation prepared to be different as better individuals, I think that we will have found the lemonade in this lemon situation, if you will.
I think it's really going to be interesting to see what kind of change, longer term change comes about after this whole thing plays out. And I'm very hopeful too, that it's a lot of positive change.
Yes, definitely. I'm looking for positive change because I think in most industries, everything can't operate back the same way. There's going to be differences. I was sharing on a Facebook thread some time ago, past couple of weeks, how even the books that are written that what people will be looking for the next year, people are going to be looking for hope, prayer, perseverance, things that they're really hungry for. But then also a lot of humorous stuff. Kids are going to want to laugh. Adults are going to want to laugh. The entertainment industry has a great opportunity to bring some really, funny stuff to lighten the mood. So anytime you have any serious situation in the world, then our literature and our music, all of those, the arts, can play a great influence in improving the world going forward.
Absolutely. And I really hope that you're right, that,
I hope so
particularly
too.
on the comedy front. It'd be great if we could all laugh a bunch,
Exactly. I was thinking this is a great time in the Christian market. It's a great time to be a Christian comedian.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that.
Just because I, want something light. I want to laugh. And I guess maybe that's my attitude. One thing I was thinking when we were saying, what did we learn, or how did God help me when I was growing up or went through adversity, trying times? He gave me a can-do attitude, but he also made me like an encourager. So I'm pretty much one time a couple years ago, someone called me a Debbie Downer, and I was so shocked, Brian. I was like, me?
No, that doesn't sound like you. That doesn't sound like you at all.
Exactly. People usually tell me I'm a Pollyanna. I'm just too light and happy and, whatever. But that's what Christ did in me. That's what God did in me. And that's what I like to share with the world and share with my readers, and what people really want. No one wants more bad news ever. Ever.
So maybe we could switch gears a little bit and talk about writing children's books.
Sure.
And I know you've, obviously got some great experience in doing this, that you could, impart some of your wisdom to some of our audience.
I would love to, Brian. A couple of things that I really wanted to share was, one of the things was that children need writing that shouts a couple of things, okay? So children need any kind of writing, whether you want to write magazine, articles, books, whatever, for kids, whatever you want to write for kids. They need material that says, I see you. I see you. You are seen. Your race, culture, heritage, history, family, they matter. And when we go across that and we share that and they feel seen, then the message that we give them is, don't hide. Don't hide. Come on out. I want to see who you are. Kids need messages that say, I hear you, and we tell them through our works, you are heard, your voice matters. And so then we invite them to speak up. Because a lot of kids feel like they're stifled, that they can't speak. So when they get books where they see these kids doing these great things, or they get nonfiction that shows how kids can speak up and make a change in the world, they're like, wow, I can speak. I don't have to hide. I can come out. I can be myself. I can speak up. And then if we have material that says, I value you. And so what that translates to a child is, you are valued. You matter. each reader picking up that material is going to say, oh, wow, I matter. Wow. And then, so well, again, that translates in the big picture, says, be you. We don't need materials that say, that teach children to be someone else. We want them to be individual. We want them to be themselves. So when I talk about writing for children, I often share reasons why we can write for children. I've shared this in workshops before. And I think part of it is we want to reach children where they are, but we also want to take them where they can be. We want them to envision a different world. That's a great, fiction does that really well because you can put them in a whole different setting. But then nonfiction also does that because you see someone who, for example, I have a book from 2016 on the collective biographies of slave resistant heroes. Black and white individuals who fought slavery. So a child reading those stories are like, wow, these people who were in slavery, they had a situation that I'm not even nowhere near, but they were able to come out of that and support other people and help save lives. Wow, I could save lives. So for today's child, that may translate into, I could be a doctor, I could be a nurse, I could be a trash collector, I could be whatever, but I can do something that makes a difference in the world. So we want to write for kids to give them something to look forward to. Some adults want to write for kids who were like them when they were kids. When I did the book, I think on cultural appropriation, I talked about an example when I was in high school, and I was in an all-girl public school, and we used to get chased at Halloween. And I talk about how that relates to cultural appropriation. I talk about how another example I gave is when I met this Puerto Rican family who pretty much adopted me, and I became the seventh daughter in the family, and how learning to speak Spanish was an example of cultural appreciation. When kids wear Halloween costumes of Native American attire, that's cultural appropriation. And so just little things like that we can share kids to help them to understand. I think if you want to write for children, you got to be able to write to inspire them, not yourself. So something that might be inspiring, and this is working with kids in general, something that might be intriguing to me or interesting to me might not really interest kids, or something that might gross me out, kids might love. Like the grossest books ever, kids absolutely love. You start talking about nose juice and all these other kind of things. Kids love that. And you're thinking, oh, I don't want to write about that. Well, you don't, but the author who does like writing about that. When you look about spiritual topics, all the different ways you can take the themes of the Bible and make them real to kids, let them understand the fruit of the Spirit, or just character, write biographies about the kids. You talk about Jesus and what he did, but you make it real for whatever age group that you're working with. And I always like to say, and I hinted on this earlier, that we can be agents for reconciliation. That means that we can help kids connect to God through some of our writing, but we also help them connect to other kids. I was thinking earlier today how one of the things that children are not dealing with, most kids are not dealing with right now with school being out across the country, for example, they're not worried about school shootings. They're not worrying about certain things that have really harmed our nation in the past few years. So they're removed from that. But children's books can also help them remove from certain situations. It can help them understand it. The whole issue of abuse and those kind of things. Kids need to understand. And one of the best books I read, Brian, was a book about suicide, and talked about, and it was a fiction, and it was probably for grades 6 to 8. But it was a girl talking about how her sister died, and then how all the family fell apart, and how they had to learn to come back together as a family in order to thrive, and also to honor the life of the sister who died. And wow. I thought, right, isn't that powerful? And I read that, I was like, wow, that's like really good. And so there's different ways we who write for children can handle what we want to write, but the sky's the limit in terms of the topics we write about. For me, I had to put together, as God started opening more and more doors, I had to start putting together a vision for children's books for myself. And what this has helped me do is it helped me to find topics that I'm writing about. But when I work for Write for Hire, particularly even for magazine articles for kids, certain topics I just don't want to write about. certain topics, in my opinion, do not jive with my faith and do not jive with the Bible. So I'm not going to write on those topics. I don't bash anybody who does, but I'm not going to write on them. So I encourage adults who want to write for children, authors who want to write for children, to consider, why do you want to write for children? What's your basic motivation? And from there, then you begin to can grow your writing career. For me, for my vision for writing children's books, I want to write on some hard topics. So for me, that's the African American family, that's the African American church, that's African American history. I wanted to pen the kind of biographies that inspired me to become a writer. I wanted to entertain through stories and information that matters. Now, in my case, because I'm writing nonfiction, I don't have a lot of entertainment element, but usually in my introduction, I can be more creative and come up with these like sort of fictional examples or fictionalize some stories from my own life in my introductions. I wanted to open kids' minds to new career paths. So reading some of my books, like I have a book on Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female doctor in America, that helps children, particularly girls, know that they can be anything, they can be doctors, but it also gives a history of how hard it was to be anything but what society said at a given time. Kids are going to have that forever. The society is always going to tell them what they can and cannot do. No, you can't be a football player. No, you can't be a ballerina, depending on what your gender is. And so books can help them to see the possibility of life. I also wanted to, inspire social activism to get children interested in making a difference in society. That could be in their home, that could be in school, that could be in their neighborhood. And so for like the Wangari title that talks about planting trees, children reading that can say, wow, she had one idea to plant a tree and it's shaped into millions of trees around the world. And her goal was 1 million trees, and they now have changed that to 1 billion trees, Brian. So a child reading that can get the idea like, wow, anything that I do can matter. One small step in the right direction can put me somewhere. So I think for those of us who want to write for children, we need to consider the children. We need to write on topics that kids are more interested in than we are, focus on them. And for those who are writing Christian content, to be able to talk to children in a way that's not Christianese, that we're not using topics that we use in church among adults all the time, that children have no idea what that means, particularly the younger children. Like when we teach Sunday school, when you say, give your life to Jesus, like, what does that mean? And so those are some of the tips I encourage. But I encourage anyone who's interested in writing for children to give it a try.
Wow. I just love what you're doing and the philosophy, that you have for this. It's just wonderful.
Thank you.
It's so wonderful to see, that's going to be blessing a lot of kids, to be able to understand, the concepts that you're talking about, to be able to, think for themselves, right? What they want to do, what they don't want to do, just such
that's hard.
Yeah. I mean, when it's one thing for adults, it's another thing for kids that just haven't experienced much. They haven't figured out as much, they're still learning and growing, and to be able to support them with these different concepts that you've touched on is really a wonderful thing.
Thank you. I'm excited. Like I said, it's the avenue God gave me. And as a writer, I just keep looking for God's direction. And this is one of the paths he has me on among the different writing paths that I'm on.
Well, it's clear that you have a passion for it and you have a calling for it, right? And so how can you beat that? Great ingredients.
Exactly. Thank you, Lord.
Well, Lisa, I just really want to thank you for spending some time with us and sharing all of the wisdom and insight and experience that you've got. And I know it'll be a blessing to our audience. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I really appreciate the time we spent together. And it's always just so lovely to talk to you.
Well, same here. It's always a gift to collaborate with you. So
exactly.
I'm looking forward to much more of that.
Thank you.
All righty.